In just 10 minutes, I'm going to show you how to go from writing E-grade sentences to A-star grade sentences. And my analogy is of a house. Some houses are quite untidy, and this E-grade paragraph is a very untidy house. Some houses are tidy, but they're a bit boring. There's not much stuff inside them. That would be a C-grade paragraph. Some houses are not only tidy and clean, but they're also full of interesting stuff, unique to that individual. And that's what an A-star grade paragraph looks like. Let's see how we can get there. All of these paragraphs are written as a letter to your local newspaper, giving your opinion about the closing of a hospital in the area. This would be in the English language writing section. Let's see what the first person wrote and think of 3 main ideas to bring them from an E to a C in the first part of our journey. I am writing to you today to say how unfair it is that the hospital is closing for all the people of the area, taking away their chance of health. It is bad to take money from hospitals, as they are a benefit for all the people of the area. Now, I like how this person's writing into their local newspaper and they've got a good point to make, but they're struggling a bit to make that point. Notice how the sentences are really quite long and they're going on and on. It's a bit like when someone's speaking. You don't mind listening to someone speak for a long time if they've got interesting, good points to make. But if they're just not really saying anything and they're not really giving any reasons for their argument, it's not as nice to listen to. These sentences need more punctuation, or they need to be broken up a lot more. They'll have a lot more impact if they're a bit shorter and contain clearer points. So my first bit of advice, is for this to be more concise and more clear. Concise just means shorter and more to the point. The second thing you may have noticed is there are a couple of errors in here, and I'm not going to focus on that too much, because one of my overall messages for this video is to say the best way to improve on those basic kind of errors, like with spelling and grammar, is to read. The more you read, like listening to music, you'll just be able to tell when something's out of tune, because you've heard so much good music. If you read loads and loads of good books, you'll just be able to tell when a sentence doesn't sound right. So read. Let's make that a bit bigger, because it's so important. There we are. Read. So the writing was spelt wrong. They don't need 2 T's. And the there, they chose the wrong there. It should have been the EI there, because it's someone else's chance of health. The ER there is for when it's just over there or something like that. So those kind of errors are something that will fade away the more and more you read. The next point I would make is they don't really back up their points. So they'll say something like it is bad and it's unfair, but they don't really say why it's unfair. So this would be an example of a kind of untidy house. There's stuff in there, but it's kind of a bit all over the place, and there's no real order to it. Let's look at a house that has a bit more order. It's a bit cleaner, but it's just not that interesting. I am writing to the newspaper because of the sad decision to close the hospital. There are many reasons why this is a bad decision. There might be people who will die because of this. And also, what else are you going to spend the money on? This is just unfair. There are a couple of things I like about this paragraph. First of all, they've at least mentioned the fact that they're writing to a newspaper. They're starting to answer the question. The first paragraph didn't even say who they're writing to. You've really always got to focus on the question. The question was, write a letter to your local newspaper giving your opinion about the closing of a hospital in the area. So this person mentioned that they're writing to a newspaper. To be honest, that's kind of it. They didn't really say anything else about writing to a newspaper. They kind of just started speaking. But at least they started off quite well. The second thing I like is that the sentences had different lengths. Rather than just being blah blah blah, blah blah blah, it was much more like blah blah, blah blah blah, blah. It's nicer to listen to. Notice this last sentence is quite short, only 4 words, whereas the third sentence is much longer. But you might say, well, didn't you say long sentences were bad in that first bit? Well, the reason why this works is because it's got some points to make. There's a reason why you should listen. There's 2 clear points. There might be people who will die because of this. That's one point. And also, what else are you going to spend the money on? 2 clear points as the reason why it's a bit longer sentence. I also like the fact they've used a rhetorical question. What is a rhetorical question? Well, it's a question you don't really expect an answer to. So here they've said, what else are you going to spend the money on? They're obviously not expecting the reader to say, oh, well, we'll spend it on this and this and this. They're really just saying the question for impact, and I like that. It's really just to make good points and back them up. Speaking of that, this person hasn't really backed up their point. Why will people die because of this? Can you justify your argument? This person hasn't really backed up their point, and that's something I would mention in terms of a room to improve. Another place they can improve is their vocabulary. Again, is not very ambitious. They've called it a sad decision and a bad decision. These are quite basic words, quite C-grade words. I'm sure we can think of far more interesting words to use. And if we can't, well, if we read, I'm sure in all those books we read, we'll find some more interesting words to use. In fact, I promise you, you will find more interesting words to use the more you read. Let's look at that A-star paragraph. I am writing to the newspaper in response to your shocking article on the closure of the local Camden hospital. I cannot see how John Smith MP can justify this atrocious decision. There were over 2,000 patients who relied upon the vital services that were provided. Some of them are elderly and will find it particularly hard to relocate to another hospital. Your readers will find this disgusting. First of all, they've really focused on how they're writing to a newspaper. They're answering the question directly. Not only, like with the C-grade paragraph, have they mentioned that they're writing to a newspaper, they've also talked about the newspaper's readers. They're making it realistic. They've talked about an article that they read. Second of all, they've given a lot more detail. They've given what their local area is, Camden. They've talked about how many patients are affected by this decision. The third thing is they've backed up their point. Not only have they called it an atrocious decision, they've also said why it is atrocious. Because some of the patients are elderly and will find it particularly hard to relocate to another hospital. Okay, well, I can kind of start believing the argument now. Yeah, you're right. If they close that hospital, then what are those elderly people going to do? I have something to latch onto. I can start to be convinced, rather than just saying, oh, well, this person's clearly angry. That's it. Whereas now with this A-star paragraph, it's like, they're angry? Oh, and that's why they're angry. Hang on a second, that's a really good point. That's the kind of thing you're looking for. Back up. To really turn the person's mind around, to change their opinion. Another thing you might have noticed is the vocabulary is really quite ambitious, atrocious. That's a word you might want to sprinkle into some of your writing. It means really, really terrible. Vital means really, really important. And disgusting, as you might know already, means horrible. All of these interesting words makes it that bit more fun to read the article. Another point I'd make is that the arguments were quite original. That would be my key word for getting an A-star, as opposed to an A, is originality. That's what the examiners, and anyone reading your writing in life, are looking for. They're looking for a house that's unique, for a load of things that make it special just to you. And this person's thought of quite an interesting argument. They're focusing on those elderly people who will have to move. The more that you can be original, the better for an A-star. I hope all of these things have convinced you that it's not magic to improve your writing, to get awesome paragraphs. There are certain things you can do to improve your writing. And I would say number one, above all, is to read, and read some more.